Welcome to the 10th Leslie Riedel Memorial Lecture. My name is Karen Ahern, and I'm pleased to be able to work part-time in the new children's wing. If you haven't been down there to see it, it's really very impressive. We're actually in the old children's room. And it's wonderful to be able to hold this in person. Last year it was virtual because of COVID, but this year it's going to be in person. It's notable that this is the 10th of the Leslie Riedel Memorial Lectures and the 30th anniversary of the Festival of Authors. The Leslie Riedel Memorial Series was created in memory of Leslie Riedel by her family and friends so that young people could meet some of their favorite authors and illustrators. The award honors Leslie's love of youth literature and the sharing of books with young people. Today, I'm very pleased to award the honor to Rajani. Oh, I blew it. Rajani. Rajani. I was practicing. I knew I was. I had this right. Rajani Laraka, Concord author and enthusiastic supporter of the library. She was born in Bangalore, India, and came to the United States as a baby, spending most of her early years in Louisville, Kentucky. After attending Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, she became an internal medicine physician at Mass General Hospital in 2001. Rajani's love of reading has evolved into her love of writing for young people. She writes in many different genres: novels, picture books, nonfiction, and poetry. Her novel, Red, White, and Whole, won the 2022 Newbery Honor and was selected as one of the Big Six titles for the summer reading at the Concord's Middle School. And hot off the press from the Concord Journal last week, she won the Massachusetts Book Award for young people. So I'm going to list a few of the honors, but every single of her titles has won numerous awards. So I'm not going to read all of the awards, but they include, among others, the Newbery Honor, the Walter Dean Myers Award, New England Book Award, School Library Journal Best Book Award, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and they're all written with diversity in mind. Forthcoming books include a nonfiction picture book about the heart. This is interesting, maybe because she's a doctor. And the importance of vaccination, and it's a very timely title, as well as books about family. There's one about an aunt, there's one about a grandfather, and there's one about a cousin. How will you do all of this and still find time to do everything else? That is beyond me. Rajani's books illustrate the importance of young people of color seeing their culture represented in books. Thank you to the Friends of the Library for all of the yummy cookies, and everybody's going to be required to take a number of them because I think they went a little overboard with the cookies. To Caroline Nee, who is doing all of the technology for this program and for all of our programs. And especially to Rajani for broadening library collections with intergenerational and culturally sensitive books. Porter Square Books has provided some books for an autograph session after the talk. Please join me in welcoming Rajani Laraka.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. It's a little loud. Thanks so much, Karen. Thank you to everyone here, and thank you to the Concord Public Library for this honor. I'm so delighted to be here. We moved to Concord in 2001. Oh, is it feedback? I'm just going to turn it off. I think you're good. There you go. We moved to Concord in 2001, and we have been frequent library patrons since then. I remember my own children being in this room, in the kids' room in the library, and reading lots of stories here. And so it's just especially wonderful to be here talking to you all today. I thought I would tell you a little bit about how I got to be an author and share kind of the inspiration for a few of my books, including Red, White, and Whole. And for the young people especially, but maybe also for the grown-ups, you know, if I ask questions of you, feel free to answer, okay? Okay, so who am I? So I am a book lover from way back when. That is a picture of me on my way back from India when I think I was 8 years old, clearly really engrossed in a book. I am a mom and wife. That is from a few years ago, as you can tell, because my kids were little then, but they're 23 and 20 now, so they're grown-ups who love books now. And I'm also a doctor. I work at MGH Charlestown, not too far from here, and I've been there for 21 years already also. So I'm a lot of things, but we've been here in Concord for a long time and consider this our home, and we're so happy and proud to have raised our kids here, so we're delighted to be here. I'm also the author of all of these books. I have 9 out so far. So my first book, Midsummer's Mayhem, came out in 2019. My first picture book, 7 Golden Rings, came out in 2020. And 6 books came out last year, including Red, White, and Whole. And this year, I'll Go and Come Back as my 9th book that just came out. And I've got another 6 coming next year, as was just alluded to. So it's going to the collage is getting bigger. So I wanted to tell you about the stories about these 4 books in particular. So, as mentioned, I was born in India. I grew up in the US. We started off in New York like a lot of immigrant families do, but ended up in Louisville, Kentucky. Do the young people in here, do you know where Kentucky is by any chance? Yeah? Awesome. A lot of times people know where India is, but they couldn't tell you where Kentucky is. So it's about 1,000 miles from here. And it was a really nice place to grow up. Once upon a time, I could do a cartwheel. I don't think I can do that anymore. And I'm an only child. I don't have any brothers or sisters. So that's a picture of me with my parents in the middle of a lake in the middle of Kentucky. And I'm rocking some awesome late 1970s, early 80s clothing, because that is the era in which I grew up. And I grew up and I was happy. It was a really nice place to grow up. We had a great community through my school and also our Indian American community, and I loved it, and I read a lot of books. But there were times when I felt like I lived in 2 different worlds, right? There was the American version of me that went to school all week long, and there I am at a Christmas party with my Add a Bead necklace. That's very cool at that time. And on the weekends, I spent almost all my time with my parents and our Indian community, and that is me wearing a costume for a type of dance called Bharatanatyam, an Indian classical dance. So I took lessons and performed. And so sometimes I wondered which one was the real me. Was it the American me during the week at school, or was it the Indian me on the weekends? And then every few years we would go to India to visit our relatives because we didn't have any relatives in the US. And when I went to India, no matter what clothes I wore or how I tried to talk, it was clear that I was not Indian because they knew immediately. So I began to wonder sometimes whether there was a place in this world where I actually did belong. So those were some of the things that I thought about when I was a kid, but my path to becoming an author started with loving books. So I hope there are some book lovers in here. Are there any book lovers in here? Yeah. I would hope so in the library. So here are some of my favorite books from when I was a kid. My all-time favorite book was The Westing Game, which I think won the Newbery Medal in 1979. And it is a mystery about a bunch of people who are called to the reading of a will of a rich old man, and they find out during the reading of the will that he died under mysterious circumstances, and whoever figures out what happened to him gets all of his money. And it's got a really big range of characters, and they were all wonderful, but my favorite was Turtle Wexler, a little girl who is determined to find out what happened to Mr. Westing, mainly to get his money, but also during the course of the book, she realizes that there were other reasons to find out what happened to Mr. Westing, and she kind of forms relationships with all the other characters in the book. So that was my favorite. I also loved books by Madeleine L'Engle, so her most famous one is probably A Wrinkle in Time, but I loved this book called The Arm of the Starfish, which is kind of a continuation of some of those stories, and it involves marine biologists who are studying starfish and trying to figure out how they regenerate their limbs. So if a starfish loses an arm, it can regrow it, right? So the scientists in this story were trying to figure out if they could apply that to people. And I couldn't tell where the science ended and the science fiction began, and I thought that was amazing. So I was fascinated by that. I love the Chronicles of Narnia. Has anybody in here read those? Yeah. So there was a cartoon version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that I saw when I was a kid, and I was fascinated by it, and I was in my school library, and I told my librarian, I said, I wish there were more to that story because that was really interesting. And she said, there are 7 books. And I was like, oh, what a gift. So I read all those. Up in the upper right corner is a picture from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. So we read A Midsummer Night's Dream in 6th grade, and I fell in love with the story because it's funny. It involves magical people, fairies, in fact, and regular people, and it involves the woods, and there's a big mix-up where the wrong person falls in love with the wrong person, and I just thought it was hilarious. So after that, every year in school, we read at least one Shakespeare play until the end of high school, and so that was the beginning of my fascination with Shakespeare. I love me a good murder mystery. I love The Lord of the Rings. And on the bottom are 3 Indian comic books called Amar Chitrakathas. And I read them when I was in India. When I would visit during our summer, my cousins would have school, so I would have to find a way to occupy myself, and I would go to the library. And so they had these comic books, and they tell stories from Indian history and literature and mythology. And I didn't go to school in India. I didn't learn any of those stories in school. So in many ways, these comic books showed me what it was to be Indian, showed me what my own culture was about. And it was wonderful. And so I would have conversations with my parents about these comics. And they were like, how did you learn this story? And I'm like, it's the comic book. You should read it too. I will just point out, so Savitri, the one in the middle there, is actually a story that plays a big role in Red, White, and Whole as well. And that is the original cover that I saw when I was a kid. Now I think they've updated everything, but I couldn't forget how beautiful that cover was. One other book that I wanted to point out was this book called Ouch, All About Cuts and Other Hurts. And I read it when I was a little younger than you all. And in it kind of talks about all the things that happen in our body when we get a little scratch or a little cut. And on the right, you can see there's a little capillary, a little tiny blood vessel that's torn, and there's blood coming out and white blood cells coming in. And a few minutes later, it's been the bleeding has stopped, and there's a plug with fibrin and platelets, and on the surface of the skin is a scab. So everyone in here has seen a scab, right? Yeah, we see scabs. That was what a scab looked like on the outside, but that is kind of like what a scab looks like on the inside. And I was so fascinated by that. I thought, isn't it amazing the ways that our bodies heal themselves without us having to think about it? And I thought maybe I would be interested in learning more about this, and maybe I wanted to go to medical school. So I decided pretty early on in my life that that's what I wanted to do. If I could, I wanted to go into medicine. So when I was your age, I liked to write. I liked to write in elementary school and middle school and even high school. But I also knew that I wanted to go into medicine, and it felt like these things were in conflict with one another. This is a picture of one of my English teachers. He did not carry that skull around when he was teaching me, but this is Mr. Hertzfeld. And when I was in high school, I was in his creative writing class, and I said to him, I really love writing, but I know this isn't what I want to do for my career. I want to go into medicine. And he said something to me that changed my life. He said, "Who says you have to choose?" And the next day he brought in all these books by authors who happened to be doctors. And it planted a seed in my head. I was like, maybe I can come back to writing someday. So after college, I went to medical school, and I trained at Mass General Hospital, and then I started working at Mass General Charlestown Healthcare Center, which is where I work today, and that is my office. And I'm a doctor, an internal medicine doctor, so I'm a primary care doctor for adults. I love it. I love my job. I love taking care of people. I love my colleagues. I love how we all work as a team to help people. But then, 11 years ago, I thought, maybe there's room in my life now that my kids are older and I've been practicing medicine for a while. Maybe there's room in my life now to go back to writing. And so I started taking some classes. Now, do any of the young writers in here, do you ever share work with friends? Yeah, that's what I do too. So I met a lot of writers who were also working on books, and we would share our writing, and then I had friends who had said, what happens next? And when you have a friend who is asking you what happens next, you have to keep going. So I kept going, and in around 2013, I was like, maybe I want to get published. Maybe I'll try. So I wrote my first book, Midsummer's Mayhem, and it came from a memory from when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, sometimes my dad would go on business trips, and I had an overactive imagination. So when he came back, I thought, what if the person who comes back just looks like my dad but isn't actually my dad? How would I know the difference? And so I made up all these quiz questions that only my real dad would know the answer to. And luckily, it was always my dad. But when it came time to write the story, I thought, what if there's a girl whose dad comes back from a business trip and he's acting weird, and there's something actually wrong with him, but she's the only one who notices? And then I thought to myself, well, why is she the only one who notices? I was like, maybe she's the youngest of four and everyone's busy and she's the one who's really waiting for him to come back. And then I was like, what's wrong with him? So this is my dog, Boomer. Yes. Boomer helped me with this. Boomer helps me with a lot of writing. We take Boomer in the woods a lot, writing the conservation land around here in Concord, right? So we were, I was inspired by that setting, and I thought maybe the magical thing is something from the woods. And I was like, who's in the woods? I was like, oh, I know who's in the woods. Those fairies from Shakespeare's play. And so it all kind of came together. I was like, there's something magical in the woods, and the fairies are in Shakespeare's play. And then I remembered that there is a link between Shakespeare's play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and India, which the family in this book is like my family. The mom is Indian, the dad is not Indian, the kids are mixed, everyone's happy. And the setting of this story is a place called Comedy, Massachusetts, which is, it's a little bit like Concord, Massachusetts, and there might be allusions to famous literary people who live in this town as well. So so I had a lot of fun with that. And then there's the family. We were in Paris baking macarons, and there's my daughter Mira, who loved to bake from when she was little. So this book is very much inspired by that as well. So there's the baking, and there's Shakespeare, and there's Concord, Massachusetts, and those are the inspirations for this book. So then, when you try and get published, you have to send out letters to people and say, hey, this is who I am, this is what my book is. And I got a whole lot of no. But I didn't give up, and I kept going, and I revised, right? You rewrite things to make them better. So I worked really hard, and eventually it came out in 2019, Midsummer's Mayhem. And I was just so excited about this book. I'm so excited that it existed. I had a lot of fun. There are recipes in the book. I had a lot of fun making those recipes too. So that was great. And it is my homage to this town. So Midsummer's Mayhem, in case you don't know, is about an 11-year-old girl named Mimi who loves to bake, but she feels a little bit lost and forgotten in her own family because she has 3 older siblings who are super good at all kinds of things, and she thinks she's never going to be as good at anything as they are. But then she visits a new bakery in town called the While Away Cafe, and she meets the owner and finds out there's going to be a kids' midsummer baking contest, and she feels like if she could just win the contest, she can finally prove that she is not the least talented member of her family. But then her dad, who is a food writer and usually helps her with her recipes, comes back from a business trip, and he acts really strange, and he can't tell the difference between delicious food and disgusting food, and he just kind of eats everything in sight. So without his help, she doesn't know how she's going to win the contest. Then she goes into the woods behind her house and meets a boy named Vic who also loves to bake, and with his help, they find all these ingredients in the woods and bake with them, and then everyone around her starts acting really weird. So she's got to figure out what's wrong with everyone, can she fix it, and can she win the contest? So I want to talk to you a little bit about this nonfiction picture book that I wrote called The Secret Code Inside You, All About Your DNA. This was also inspired by my dog. There's a theme here. I was walking the dog, and this refrain literally popped into my head. There's a secret code inside you, a code called DNA. And I was like, oh. And I thought it was really, because DNA is the thing that makes us different from dogs or cats or any other animal or plants or rocks, right? We're different, right? And so I thought about that, and I thought about how not only, so DNA determines who we are, but we also make choices as people who determine who we are. So I wanted to put both of those things in a book. And I'm a doctor, so I'm inspired by this. So as doctors, we're often thinking about nature versus nurture, like what things do we inherit and what things can we affect? And the answer, of course, is that it's both, right? We inherit certain characteristics, but we can also change things about ourselves through our actions. This book is written in rhyme. It's a nonfiction book written in rhyme. I'm not ever doing that again because revising it was very challenging. But I did, and for a long time, I couldn't figure out why it had to be in rhyme because I kept trying to unrhyme it and it refused to be unrhymed. But then I realized later on that nucleotide pairs in DNA pair up the same way every time, just like rhyming lines do. And I was like, that's it. It was my subconscious. So here's a spread from there. The secret code inside you is split up into genes, unraveled and decoded. They're used to make proteins. The proteins from your DNA make muscles, bones, and skin. They dictate what you look like on your outside and your in. This is I'll Go and Come Back. This is the picture book that just came out this March with Candlewick. This had to do with my visits to India. I would go to India, and sometimes when I was there, it felt very different from home and really made me homesick, and it was hard to kind of get used to things because it was a lot louder than it was here, and it was just very different. But my grandmother and my other relatives always helped me out, and then one year my little grandma came to visit me in the U.S., and she thought things were really different here, and it was hard for her, and she was feeling homesick, and I kind of helped her out. So I thought of this idea when I was at a writing conference, and I'm not even an artist, but I drew this drawing about a pattern, like a sari pattern that was one side is the reflection of the other, and it was the girl's experience and the grandmother's experience being kind of mirror images of each other. And so this is a spread from I'll Go and Come Back. So Sita was my grandmother's name, and Pati is the way you say grandma in Tamil. So she took me to the market. I'd never seen so many types of vegetables. One looked like it could slither away. Padaval, said Sita Pati, snake gourd. That is a real vegetable, and it really does look like a snake. It doesn't move, but it looks very scary. Let's get okra instead, I said. At home, we played a game called Palanguri. Sometimes Pati counted wrong. She liked to win. And that is true about my grandma. We played this game one time, and one year I was like, wait a minute, I think she just miscounted. And I looked at my cousin across the room, and he's like, oh yeah. He's like, if you don't call her on it, basically she's going to win one way or the other. Okay, so finally, Red, White, and Whole. So the idea for this story, so let me tell you about this story in case you haven't read it. This book is set in 1983. And it is about a 13-year-old girl named Reha who feels torn between the worlds of her Indian immigrant parents and her friends at school. And like any normal American kid, she wants to wear cool clothes, listen to awesome music, and go to a middle school dance. But her parents, and especially her mom, feel that she has better things to do with her time. So Reha is struggling with this when she finds out that her mom has been diagnosed with kind of blood cancer called leukemia. And she feels like if she could just be the perfect daughter, the daughter that her parents want her to be, that she can somehow save her mom's life. So the idea for this story came to me as a metaphor. And when I do school visits, I usually ask people, kids, if they know what a metaphor is, but I'll just tell you to not put you on the spot. So a metaphor is a kind of figurative language where you're comparing two things, right? So that the thing that you're comparing something to is not literally what they are, but it's kind of related to what they are. So if you say somebody is a big bear of a man, right? It doesn't mean that he's actually a bear, but it might mean that he's big or hairy, or maybe he likes to eat honey, that kind of thing. And so So the metaphor that came to me for this book was the metaphor of blood. Those are red blood cells. And all that means in terms of biology, of course, because I'm a doctor, but also in terms of family and community. And so I thought, if the book came to me as a metaphor, maybe I should write it in poetry. And I was like, okay, that's great, but you've never written an entire novel in poetry before. How are you going to do this? So I got my hands on every novel for kids that was written in poetry and kind of educated myself. And then I just tried. I just tried to write it. So a lot of the emotions in this story are straight from my life, even though the events of the story are not exactly my life. I also felt like I'd been torn between the American world and the Indian world. I really loved the 80s. We lived in a really awesome time. Those were awesome clothing. That's awesome clothing from the 80s. This is a mixtape, a cassette tape. A mixtape, I'm telling you. So when I go on school visits, I ask children, how did we listen to music in the 80s? Because we had no cell phones, we had no iPads, there was no internet. We didn't even have laptops for the most part. So kids are just mystified. And then I'm like, we still listen to music this way now. And they're like, the radio. And I'm like, yes. So we would tape songs off the radio. We would put them onto these tapes, like we would record them onto these cassette tapes. And then if we were really, really into music, we would take songs from one cassette tape and put it onto another cassette tape and make a mixtape, and it would take all day. So it's like making a playlist, only it takes you all day. And so if somebody made you a mixtape, that was a big deal. So there's a lot of 80s music in this book, too, because I loved those songs, and they meant a lot to me. And then this is a picture of me and my mom from when I was that age. My mom didn't have leukemia, but she was injured really badly in a car accident when I was a teen. And I remembered feeling, so Reha in the book wants to be a doctor, but then when her mom gets sick, she feels horrible going into the hospital because it just makes her sick to her stomach. And I felt the same way. And obviously, I got through that. I ended up going to medical school, but Reha is struggling with this in the book, and I captured some of that. And then, in case you can't tell, there's a lot of food in all of my books, and these are black mustard seeds that we use a lot in South Indian cooking, and so they play a role in the book as well as a metaphor for home and what it, and like her mom's cooking, basically. So, okay. I got to write a story about all these things that I struggled with when I was a kid. And I don't think that 13-year-old me would have believed that I would write this story, but somehow I did. And I got to talk about music and biology and mythology. This is the story of Savitri, who literally defeats the god of death. And Reha thinks about that story and thinks about what she can do to help her mom. And nature and Star Wars. So I get to put all these things that I love into a book, and I felt like it was the closest thing to me that I'd ever written, and so I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. But somehow my agent loved it. We sold it to a publisher right away. Everything was. I went to New York and I got to meet them at HarperCollins. It was very exciting, and then this happened, right? So it was a very weird year for all of us, right? But it was really hard knowing that this book was coming out the next year and not knowing what was going to happen. And then, of course, the pandemic carried on for much longer than any of us really believed it could. But things turned out okay because kid readers still got to read. And I somehow got to meet a lot of you virtually, even during the pandemic. And somehow this book that meant so much to me got a lot of recognition, including the New England Book Award, the Golden Kite Award, which is an award from writers, which was exciting. The Massachusetts Book Award was just announced a couple of weeks ago. I can't even believe it. The Walter Dane Myers Award. And then, just for fun, these are the pictures of me when I got the call about the Newbery Award. My husband took these photos. It was unbelievable. For somebody who loved reading those books with those stickers on them, I couldn't believe that mine was going to have one. So, I'm going to end by just, talking about my hopes for all of my books for readers, young and old. One is that I want you all to realize that none of us is just one thing, so that all these things that we are interested in that seem to be unrelated, they're all related by us, and that we shouldn't let the world limit what we do. Number two is that a lot of my books are about belonging and the notion of finding the place where you belong. And ultimately, I have discovered as an adult that we decide where we belong and that we create the communities where everyone belongs. So that's kind of our joy and our obligation to each other. And finally, that your story matters. So I know as a doctor that we are telling stories all the time. You don't have to be a writer, right? We're always telling stories about each other and about ourselves to other people and to ourselves. So I want you to know that whoever you are, wherever you come from, that your story matters and we need to hear it. So here is my advice for telling your story. Lean into joy. This is what Mimi is told. To create something from your heart, something only you and all the world can make. And that is the key to winning a contest or anything. Lean into curiosity. The secret code inside you is how you are designed. The actions you choose every day make you one of a kind. Use your experiences. And I remember that no one in India ever just said, goodbye. I'll go and come back, I said. Poi tu varei. And tell the story of your heart. You will write your own story and it will be beautiful because it is yours. So that is it. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please feel free. Yes?
My first question, this is only the first one.
Yes.
The Newbery Award, when you got the phone call, how did they know that you were going to be there to answer the phone?
That's a very good question. The question was, how did they know I was going to be there to answer the phone for the Newbery Award? So they don't know. And what they do is, the publisher gives them your cell phone. So I got a call from a Chicago area number, and I picked it up because I was like, whatever. And then somebody said, I'm from the American Library Association, and there's a committee that has some very good news for you. Could we call you back from a different number? And I was like, okay. So then we turned off the football game. And I got ready, and he got ready, apparently, with his camera. So then they called back, and it was a conference call, because they're from all over the country. And so with the conference call, I had to, it automatically mutes you, so it gives you, the robot is giving you instructions for how to unmute, and it took me 3 tries to figure out how to, I was like, that was crazy. So the whole committee was on the phone, and told me. And then they told me the hardest thing of all, friends. They said the announcements, the public announcements, are the next day, so don't, you can tell your family, but don't tell anybody else. And I was like, okay. So we called our kids, and my son, who was at Williams College at the time, he goes, should I come home? I was like, don't you have a class? I don't think you should come home. But it was great. That was a Sunday night. So they don't know. And then I called my editor, because I was like, because she knew. They tell the publishers a little bit early, but not too much early, I don't think. So it was very exciting. Yeah.
Did you draw the pictures?
I did not draw the pictures. What's really amazing is that, for novels, the publisher gets an illustrator, and they usually send you some sketches of what they think would look good for a cover, and then, they do the cover, and it's incredible. And I've been very lucky with all of my covers. For picture books, it's the same, unless you're an illustrator yourself, and I am not an illustrator at all. The publisher finds an illustrator, or they give you a list of people that they think it might be good, and then they try and get someone, and then they work separately with them. There's an art director that works separately with the illustrator for a long time until they get kind of preliminary sketches, and then they send them to you in case you have comments. And what's really cool about picture books is that half of the story is the illustrations. And I never meet my illustrators, almost never. And so it's a really interesting and fun process. There's a There's a my picture book called Your One and Only Heart that is coming out next year, and it's in poetry. And the illustrations, the illustrator works in collage. So everything, oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. And she lives, I think, in North Carolina, so we're going to try and do an event together somewhere in the South, and I'm very excited to meet her because it's just amazing. But yeah, it's been an amazing thing to watch illustrators make illustrations based on my words, and their illustrations are more than my words because they make they just do such an incredible job. So I feel very fortunate. Yes.
Did you ever have the experience where you started working with an illustrator, you saw the pictures, and it changed your mind about what you were writing?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, in that sometimes when an illustrator comes through with illustrations, you realize you don't need as many words on a page. You don't have to explain something because it's in the illustration. Sometimes with The Secret Code Inside You, the illustrator came back and said, hey, for this page, I've got all these actions that are being performed, and these two are very similar. Could you change something here to make it something different than those two things? And I was like, absolutely. So it was very interesting and collaborative, but almost all the time we end up subtracting words because the illustrations take over so much of the story. Yes?
Was the boy in this story, Vic, also inspired by someone you know?
Was Vic inspired by someone I know? Oh, that's such an interesting question. Not somebody I know, but have you read the book?
No.
Okay. Vic is inspired by a literary character. And you'll find out who it is when you read the book. But I had a lot of fun imagining a backstory for somebody who is barely mentioned in Shakespeare's play, and creating a character with kind of a whole life and wants based on that. That was really, really interesting. But many of the characters that I create have something to do with someone I've known at one point, but not necessarily exactly that person. Sometimes they're just things that people say, and you're just like, really? And then you put that into a character. Yes.
Your book on Kamala Harris is very timely. So does your publicist come up with subjects that need to be written about, or do you suggest to the publicist?
That's a great question. So the Kamala Harris book was unusual. Like most of my stories, I just come up with an idea and I say, here's a story. But for that book, they reached out to me. They said, it was after the election was called. Basically, I think within days after the election was called, they contacted my agent and said, would she be interested in writing this little golden book? And I said, absolutely. And they said, okay, we need it in a month. And I was like, okay. So that was, but it's always interesting. And then they gave me examples of their other little golden books that were biographies. Because, my little golden book experience was from years ago, like my own childhood. Exactly. My own childhood and my kids' childhood. But now they've done so much to expand the series. It's very interesting. So I understood approximately the word count and like how many pages there were going to be. And then I just tried to fit in everything at a preschool reading level or preschool, content level. Yes.
You mentioned getting a few notes from publishers. I just wonder how long was it between the time you finished your first book that you found a publisher that was published?
Oh, great question. So many of the no's were from agents. So in order to be traditionally published in the U.S., most of the time you cannot submit directly to publishers, at least to the large publishers. And so you need a literary agent. And I got, 25 rejections before I got a bunch of offers. So it was a long, and that was over years. Like I tried to query this manuscript in 2015 and I got a bunch of rejections and I was like, this is not where it needs to be. And I rewrote it. And then in 2017, at the end of 2017, I signed with my agent and we started submitting it to publishers in 2018. It went to what they call acquisitions 6 different times and got shot down until finally there were multiple publishers who were interested and it went to the right publisher. But it was a very difficult thing. And here's the other thing, kids. My kids watched me get told no over and over again, and I think that was good. Because I think a lot of times grown-ups are always telling kids no. But you don't see us getting told no a lot of times. And we get told no too, and it's not easy. So it was good. My kids, there was a low point where I felt like I was just going to give up. I was like, this is just, like, writing is stressing me out and I'm not getting anywhere, and what is the point of any of this? And I have a real job and I have kids and a dog and a husband, and like, come on. But my children said to me, they said, Mom, we love your stories and we think other kids will too. And then they also said, and you always told us if we really wanted to do something and people told us no, that we should keep trying. So when your own kids give you advice, you kind of have to follow it. So I didn't give up, and I'm grateful to them for reminding me of that. Yes?
So you said you did some of those classes in school to kind of learn things. How did you know, like, this is it, this is the work I'm sure you've written other stories and other things and noodles went through that. How did you say, like, this is what I'm going to move forward? Like, how did you find it?
How did I choose? Okay, well, I wrote, so part of what I would say I did was I just kept increasing the number of things I was working on. And picture books were good for me because you can finish a picture book quickly. You may not get it right and you may have to rewrite it 70 times, which I did. But at least it's a small number of words and you're like, okay, I can get my mind around this. With the novel, I'm just a very stubborn person. I was like, this novel is like Midsummer's Mayhem is so uniquely me that this kind of has to be my first book. I was like, it's got baking and Shakespeare and like Indian food, why? Who else is going to write that book? So I stuck with it and I really just kept going at it until I finally got it to where I needed it to be. So, yeah. And then the other books, I think the more you write, the more you get an instinct for things that are going to resonate with you first. Like, that's the most important thing, is that you think that they're important and good. And then the rest of it, in terms of other people, hopefully they will think it's important and good too. But it has to be something from your heart first. And when I first started writing, I was worried that I would run out of ideas. But then now I have so many ideas, I know I'll never be able to write them all. So now I have to decide. And a lot of it is just instinct in the moment. Like if I'm inspired to write something, I'm like, go write it now. And, just like take some notes right now before that goes away. So yeah, I feel very lucky. And I think that as much as I believe in practicing craft and really learning objectively how to do things correctly, I think the more that you write, the more you realize that a lot of it has to do with the subconscious and has to do with instinct and has to do with that voice. I don't know, maybe it's Thoreau who's telling you, write that story, work on that story. And then the other, wonderful thing is that I have great people in my life who can help advise me about these things. So I talk about my stories with my husband. We were just thinking about a new story idea, and I was like, what do you think about this? And we, during the dog walk, can you see a theme here? The dog is central to all of it. During the dog walk, we'll just talk about ideas, or my kids will be home and I'll run things by them. So it's good to have people like that in your life, and then other writers too, who can say, oh yeah, other writers tend to be like, yeah, that sounds really good. But they can also help you kind of with the nitty gritty of like, why are you writing it like this and why not like that? So yeah, I have wonderful people in my life who help me with both idea development and also actual craft.
Can I ask another one?
Yes.
If I heard the math right, you had maybe late teenagers when you were starting?
Yes, I think one was, let me think about this. Well, I was writing in 2011, so I had a 12 and a 9-year-old, and then as I got more serious, they went through middle school and high school.
So I just thinking as a working mom of 2 kids, they're younger, you're a doctor, how did you find the time? How did you not just make it when you describe this creativity, and it all sounds very relaxed, you have to really flow, but it also sounds like you had probably space to do it, you had to do it because you had other things in other spaces. Find that balance.
So as a working mom, you know what it is to juggle, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm totally confused about it.
So But the other answer is that when you love something, you always find time for it. So I would write when they were in their piano lesson. I would just be out there going like this. I would go to baseball games. I'm sorry to my poor son, and I'm just be writing, and he'd be like, "Did you see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I was here." I'd be picking them up from school, and I'd be parked in the parking lot, not driving, also writing. I would sometimes wake up early, and sometimes I would stay up late. Then they got older, and everyone had work to do. So, like after dinner, they would go do their homework, and I would do my homework, and my husband would work, and so we would all be doing work together. But yeah, I tried to find the time. Well, I tried to find the time, and I learned that I couldn't be precious about the circumstances under which I wrote. Right? It didn't have to be a particular place. It didn't have to be a particular time of day. I didn't need to have like a special scented candle. I would just sit down and write whatever, And then as they got older, it got easier to carve out more time. But, the other thing that I will say is that we all need time to dream. And sometimes that would just be, I would go to a lecture, like some writer would show up, and I would just go listen to them speak and think about what that stirred up in me. And so these kinds of events are important because we all need time to go get input from something else and somebody else and see what happens. Mr. Hertzfeld, his famous line was, "Poets need time to stare out of windows." And, this was in the 80s when there really wasn't a whole lot else to do. we had like 5 channels on TV, and then we had work in school. But we were all like, we're not poets. And he was like, yeah, but that's the point. Even those times when you think you're not doing anything, you're actually doing a lot. So that's important too, is just time away without obligation, like even if it's 5 minutes, just to allow yourself to dream. Yes?
Did you have any pets growing up?
I did. I had a dog named Rascal. He was a German Shepherd. He was a very big dog. He was much bigger than Boomer. But Boomer is like the dog of our lives. He's a very hilarious guy. He's not that lappy because he somehow gets hot. But sometimes we can coax him and just grab him and put him in our lap. He's like 25 pounds, but he's just a very good little companion, and he really doesn't ever talk too much, and he listens a lot, which is good.
It's really helpful for young children to get the nonfiction, because when they want to find out why they happen to get a shot, vaccination, or why did they get a cut or whatever, a visit to the doctor. So are you thinking about more titles than that?
Yes, I've got a lot of ideas for nonfiction titles. Yeah, I mean, this is the other interesting thing is that for some reason we believe that like the reading, writing people are not the same as the math and science people, and that's not true. I mean, we're all the same people, right? So I've always loved math and science. I like to put a lot of math and science into my books, fiction and nonfiction. And I think medical topics are great for kids. And it's like a nice bite-sized, thing to put in a book. And the other thing is that there can be different levels. So even though it's a picture book, there's almost always an author's note or back matter where people can learn more. So older kids can read them too. I forget the guy's name. The guy on Jeopardy who broke all the records. He said he just went to the children's section in the library and read picture books all day. And that's how he learned all those facts. So there you go, for free. You have a question?
What's your favorite type of cupcake?
What's my favorite type of cupcake? Oh my goodness, that's such a great question. Okay, all right. So I like vanilla with chocolate frosting, but I also make kind of interesting flavored ones too. So there's like a lemon lavender one in the book that we make, and then there's a rose cardamom one that is like really yummy. Yeah. Great question. Yeah.
Did you prefer writing fiction or nonfiction?
Ooh, do I prefer fiction or not? I like them both. I think that I love fiction because literally you can make up anything and have it be true in the world that you create. But nonfiction is great because I just love, I do love facts. I love thinking about how things work. And the cool thing about nonfiction also is that, especially in science, they're always discovering something that we didn't know, right? Or the thing that we thought we knew is actually a little bit different than we thought. So there's always ways, like you always have to really update yourself on that kind of knowledge. So it's really fun.
Can you do a history book for children about Concord?
A history. Ooh, okay. I'll write that down. Thank you so much.
Concord history is very
Thank you, everyone. This was so much fun. Thank you for all the questions and such great questions.
Don't.
Oh my gosh, do I? Really think hard about it because I'm a doctor and my tendency is to be illegible. Well, it looks beautiful. Oh.